Alrighty guys, good morning to you. We are live. And I invite you to come join me. Give you a few moments to pop on here. It is 9:44 a.m. on this gloomy, chilly Tuesday morning. Here we go. It is the 8th day of October 2019. We've been talking about the tabernacle, and we've been talking about the items that's in the tabernacle. We looked at the holy place a few days ago, and we're inside the holy place now, and we were talking about some of the furniture that's in the holy place. And yesterday we started the study on the golden candlestick or the lampstand, and we talked about the descriptions. If you look in Exodus chapter 25 verses 31 through 36, excuse me, you'll find the description of the candlestick, and God had gave Moses detailed instructions on how the candlestick was going to be constructed. And Nikki, we are praying for you, brother. And we mentioned yesterday the reason, as we read the verses, you know, and it seems like some of it was kind of redundant, and you makes you wonder why God felt like he had to give Moses the description to write to us. But anyway, but the purpose is we must follow God's plan to a T. We must follow God's plan, you know, the way he sees fit. Even when it doesn't make sense, or even if we can't figure out why, you know, God always has a reason and a purpose. That's what we was talking about yesterday. And I'm going to give you the description of the lampstand. And it said that it was made of pure gold, and it was hammered out to the perfect accuracy of God's decree. And everything that you will find and will study about in the holy place is going to be made of gold. And gold is often spoken of in terms of being tested by fire. Go into the Bible, and many places in the Scripture you'll see where the that gold was talked about as far as tested by fire. And the Bible compares testing of gold with the testing of the church. If you go in 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 7, you know, you can read out, you know, talking about the testing and the refining of the church will come true people of God. So if you recall scriptures about, you know, gold being refined, you know, it's under the fire, but what that fire does with the gold is it burns out all the impurities in the gold. And that's the symbolization of the church. It talks about, you know, the trials by fire, you know, the trials that we go through in life, and all the things that we go through, you know, that is like fire. And its purpose is to burn out the impurities that's in us. And like I said, we can find that in 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 7. Also, you can look in Job chapter 23 verse 10. You know, and it says, out of the testing or refining will come true people of God. Those who withstand the fire will be purified. And so when you go through trials in life, and you go through hardships and heartaches, you know, just understand, you know, that it's the trying of our faith, you know, that comes through, that makes us better than what we are. So is talking about the lampstand, talking about made of pure gold, talking about it being hammered out in the fashion that it wants us to be. Sometimes don't we get hammered, and I'm not talking about in worldly terms as being drunk or anything, but sometimes it seems like we get hammered with troubles and problems. We get slammed, it seems like, with hardships and stuff in our life. But understand that if we withstand that fire, if we withstand the trials, it only makes us better. When we call out on the Lord and say, hey, I need your grace, I need your strength, I need the patience even to go through a trial. Once we're through it, then it makes us stronger. And sometimes that's why God allows struggles and things in our life, so we can learn to call on Him and to rely on Him. It's not to build our own strength, but it's to build our strength of faith in God when we go through things. So let's continue to talk about the lampstand. It says it was fashioned as a tree, with the base and the center shaft representing the trunk, and with 3 branches on each side. Like, again, you can read that in Exodus chapter 25, verses 31 through 36. It gave a detailed description of how this lampstand was going to be created and why it was supposed to be created in the way that God instructed. It says the top of the trunk and each branch was to be made like an open almond flower. It says each flower held an oil lamp. And it says there are several verses in the Bible that speaks about the almond tree, which was always the first tree to blossom and bear fruit in the spring, as early as February. Think about that. And there's a picture here that I want you to understand. It says that this was be constructed and it was be made like an almond flower. And it says this, it says the flower that held the oil lamp, it says that the almond tree was one that always blossomed first. If you go into the New Testament and you look in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 20 to 23, Paul calls Christ the first fruit, because Jesus was the first to raise from the dead to everlasting life. And we know that, Jesus had healed people and He raised people from the dead before He died on the cross. But He was the only one that had ever died and was rose again to everlasting life. It was Him, that was going to bring everlasting life. It says, and because of His resurrection, all who believes will also be raised. And again, that's 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 to 23. It says God also used Aaron's rod as a sign to the Israelites of his unique priesthood. It says that at one time, when Aaron's priesthood was being challenged, God caused Aaron's rod to bud and grow ripe almonds overnight. This miracle reaffirmed that the privilege of being chosen as the high priest only came through God's appointment. Think about that for a moment. And we know that Jesus Christ became the high priest for you and I. And we know that Jesus Christ was the sacrifice of sacrifices. Of all the sacrifices in the Old Testament, when Jesus became the sacrifice for sin, it was a permanent sacrifice. No longer do we need any other sacrifice. That's why it says, I believe it's in Hebrews chapter 10, somewhere around verse 26, it teaches us that if we neglect, Jesus Christ, there is no other sacrifice, remains no other sacrifice for sin. What he's talking about is Jesus Christ was the very last sacrifice for sin. And if we reject or neglect to accept Jesus Christ as our Savior, there's no other sacrifices that's going to be made. It's only through Him. And this is what this was teaching us. And it reaffirmed that there is a privilege of being chosen as a high priest, and it only came through God's appointment. Hebrews chapter 7 verse 21 is also a shadow of things to come. It says the point to Jesus, our God ordained life-giving high priest. And I just talked about that a few seconds ago. But Jesus became the high priest, and He went into the holies of holies, if you will, and He made the final sacrifice that sin required. And I want to go on, because look at this as we're talking about the description of the lampstand or the golden candlestick. Also, it was made with 7 parts. You had the trunk, and then you had 3 branches on either side, which made 6 branches, plus the trunk is 7. notice this, that the number of man is 6. That's imperfect. But God's perfect number, God's number of completion, is 7. And so therefore you have the branch, or the trunk, and then you have the 6 branches, and that is perfection. Folks, I want you to know that we can never have perfection in our life without Jesus Christ. The number of man is 6, but the number of God's completion, God's perfect number, is 7. And aren't you glad that Jesus Christ will make us complete? He will make us whole if we accept Him. It says man is only complete with God. Look in John chapter 15, verse 5. And then it goes on, and it says the lampstand was to be placed in the first section of the holy place. And the lamp was to be tended by Aaron and his sons, so that its light never went out. I love that. That's a wonderful picture. It says the lampstand was to give light, or give forth light, day and night. Exodus chapter 27, verses 20 and 21. It says the lampstand, being the only source of light, points directly to Christ as being the light of the world. John chapter 8, verse 12, and John chapter 9, verse 15. You know, that Jesus Christ, He is the light. You know, if we're going to be the light of the world, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, but it's not our light. It's not the light that radiates from us. But the way I picture it, you know, is look at the sun and the moon. The moon by itself does not give light. But when you see, we call it moonlight. And, you know, we look at and say the moon is bright tonight. But, you know, it's the way the moon is reflecting the light from the sun. So really, the moon itself does not have light, but it's a reflection from the sunlight. And folks, listen, you and I as Christians, we ourselves do not have light, but we reflect the sun, S-O-N. We reflect the Son of God. We reflect His light. His light shines on us, and we reflect His light into a dark world. And that's the way God expects us. You know, don't go around trying to spread your own light and spread your own goodness and righteousness, because it's none effect. But if we go out into this world and we reflect the light of Jesus Christ, we will give enough light to lead people to Jesus Christ. It says the lamp, it says was to be tended by Aaron. Okay, we just read that. Okay, it says here, the lampstand being the only source of light points directly to Jesus Christ and being the light of the world. Jesus is the true light that gives light to everyone. Look in John chapter 1, verse 9. And the only way anyone can come to the Father is through Jesus Christ. Look in John chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus said, no man can come unto the Father but by me. Everybody says, oh, we can get to heaven any way we want to. We can get to heaven without believing in Jesus. We can get to heaven without this and with that. Listen, the Bible teaches us that no man can come to the Father but by Jesus Christ. And listen to this, Christians. It says Jesus also calls the church the light of the world in Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. It says, not of their own doing, but because Christ is abiding in the church. John chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. It says, a Christian who is shining with the light of Christ will live a godly life. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. Doesn't that just make sense? A Christian that is shining with the light of Christ will live a godly life. We cannot live a godly life without the light of Christ. If we don't have the love of God in us, if we don't have the light of Jesus Christ in us, we can go through the motions, we can say that we're saved, we can say that we're a disciple for Christ, you know, but if our life doesn't prove it, then we might want to reevaluate what we're saying. And I've said that many of times before. Just because I tell you I'm something, if I can't prove it with my credentials, then it's just all talk. I tell you this, and I joke about it all the time, but if I tell you I'm a brain surgeon, I'm sure you're not going to let me crack your head open and start working on your brain unless I can show credentials and show proof that I am what I say I am. Folks, we go around and we're saying we're Christians, and I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. But if your life isn't proving what you say that you are, then it doesn't make no difference what your talk is. As if your actions and if your attitude and your behavior and things in your life doesn't line up to the Word of God. I know that's not popular preaching, but you know what? It is what it is. Scriptures is overflowing with references that compare and contrast light and darkness, believer and unbeliever. All the way through the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 1 verse 20, it says Christ says that the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. The 7 churches of Christ are to walk in with God. And it says that in 1 John chapter 1 verse 7. And it says, and spread the light of the gospel so that all people will glorify God. Matthew chapter 5 verse 16. And we're going to wrap it up with this. And it says another symbolism in the lampstand is that it was made of one piece. It was hammered out with gold, but it was made of one piece. And this symbolizes in Colossians chapter 1 verse 8 that Christ is one with his church. Unity. And I tell you, I think that's something our churches are lacking. I see all through Facebook of churches breaking up and pastors leaving and congregations kicking pastors out, and you name it, and it's happening all across and what is going on is they're lacking unity. Folks, the devil loves to drive a wedge between people. But if there's unity in the Lord, the devil won't be able to come in and break up anything. And this was a picture that Jesus was one with the church. He couldn't be divided. Satan couldn't squeeze in and try to separate him from the church. So again, the most important note about the lampstand is that it points to Jesus Christ. As with everything in the tabernacle, the Bible from beginning to end, it says a testimony about Christ and God's merciful plan of redemption. God has taken his people out of darkness and to his marvelous light. 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9. Folks, so when you walk in to the holy place, the first thing that you're going to see is the golden candlestick or the lampstand, and it was made of one piece, but it was 6 parts. And then you have the trunk, which made the 7th part, and 7th is God's complete, perfect number representing Jesus Christ. We are incomplete without Jesus Christ. They could have made the lampstand with the 3 branches on each side and had the almond flowers and the bowls with the light, and they could kept the light shining, as long as God commanded them to. But without the trunk, a tree really wouldn't stand. Folks, listen, we need to be grafted into Jesus Christ, made one piece, one part. We need to be the light of the world, but the light that we need to reflect is the light of Jesus Christ, not our own light. So, listen, that's all I've got for you as far as the lampstand. Lord willing, tomorrow we'll come back on. We're going to talk about the showbread and the golden table and see what God has, what message that God has for us on that. So, listen, thanks for watching. Make sure you share this video. Lord willing, we'll be back on tomorrow, and we'll cover another part of the furniture in the holy place as we look at the temple of the tabernacle of the Old Testament. We'll talk about the temple in weeks to come. So listen, that's all I got for you. Love you guys. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. God bless you.